Brian Dolan. I am the CEO of Verdant AI. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do. We're kind of unusual in this particular cohort. Verdant AI is a startup studio. And by that, I mean we build companies. And specifically, we build enterprise-grade artificial intelligence companies. The model is probably familiar to some of you with things like Idea Lab and High Alpha, Pioneer Square Labs, and Pre-Hype. However, we have a focus primarily on enterprise SaaS and deep tech, frontier tech companies. So the companies we build have to be data-centric and entering some sort of high revenue, high impact market. The problems we're interested in addressing are ones that support the UN Sustainable Development Goals and are solvable with frontier artificial intelligence. We don't like to do any also-rans or retasking. It's not as interesting. And the studio is comprised of seasoned networks of entrepreneurs and innovative technologists, people who've been doing this for a long time, people who have a vision of the future that includes using AI to change the world and the scope of the world. Really, we want to walk into places where there's no app for that, where it's not something that, like I said, I can retest technology, or people really haven't figured out how it works. It's an important part of how we select our companies, how we select our entrepreneurs, and how we partner with investors. So I went too far, there we go. In the last 2 years, we've developed 8 products. All of those have an individual niche. 3 of those are this year going into market and are already revenue positive. The 3 I want to talk about right now, just to give you an example of how the studio works. Biomass One uses advanced statistical learning routines to turn agricultural waste into clean energy for a $40 billion market. Right now, farmers are throwing away a lot of material that could be turned into natural gas, including things like manure and corn stover. And the reason they're doing this is that the supply chain isn't established and the data connection to the laboratory testing isn't established. So we're participating in that market by creating liquidity along the data front. Floodlight Invest is providing support for ESG reporting in the S&P 500. ESG stands for environmental sustainability and guidance and governance. Many people who are investing their money are interested in seeing how their companies are performing along ESG metrics like political contributions or EPA violations. We stepped in to help develop the product to bring the EPA violations in, which required a lot of natural language processing to understand which locations and which violations are actually measurable and which ones are creating impact. And another example, one we have going into market this year, actually raising money right now, is the True Match Recovery Index. And every year, about 100,000 people die from a drug overdose, but the rehabilitation centers across the United States are actually only half full. So we have people who are dying who need beds, and we have beds that are unfulfilled. The reason this happens is the patient advocate dealing with the addict at the crisis center, for instance, an emergency room, is unable to identify the correct rehabilitation centers. He's flooded with a whole bunch of advertisements for things that he probably doesn't need, and he can't make an actual clinical decision for that patient. And our process is, the company we've nurtured is there to help that patient advocate sort of cut through the chaos of what is hype, what is some sort of ridiculousness that somebody's trying to try to body shop, which fraud is a big part of recovery, and find a center that's actually going to work for the patient and the addict that he's currently dealing with. So those are 3 examples. We have several more, but this is part of our vision of how we're going to use our AI skills, or how we actually use our AI skills. And we're here today not seeking investment directly. We're here today to talk to people about corporate and government partnerships to tackle nearly impossible challenges, things that are too big and too hard to do on your own. A lot of startups want to walk into the AI economy and don't have the skill set necessary to do it. We like to work with major corporations in terms of joint ventures, where we jointly develop market-ready, value-driven companies. We sit and identify a need, we identify a market, and we identify a product. And then those of us at Verdant, at the studio, we actually develop the product directly. We're actual operators in the company. We act as sort of a CTO, CSO, sometimes CEO pro tem as the company gets off the ground. It's a very common thing for the studios to do. Additionally, we like to work with companies and governments and data strategy. We've done this in some local governments and some larger enterprise organizations. Because data strategy is really the key to or one of the keys to a successful endeavor. A lot of people don't understand how to push forward on their strategy. And then also, we have multiple companies seeking funding, so we'd like to provide investment opportunities for those who are looking to invest in solid product AI companies. And just a little bit of bona fides, I'm a mathematician, cyberneticist. I've been building AI products for about 25 years. I've built over 4,000 AI products in my career, so I'm very experienced in that. My last company was listed as one of Fortune's top 50 AI companies in 2019, when I just exited from. And also, we have a very solid urge to use our skills in the humanitarian sense, to use them for the UN sustainability goals. And I have had my experience in the commercial space, and I really want to go into the humanitarian space more and deeper than we have now.
Brian, I'm sorry, I have to stop you here for the time. Okay. Yeah, video over time already. Okay, thanks for that. And okay, so it was the last slide anyways.
That's just me saying thanks.
Okay, thank you back. Any questions from our experts today?
Somebody said F.
Yeah, in the chat. I think it's just wrong press on the button. So any questions? Carlo, Tanya, Joseph, and Sarah. Yeah, we have one from Carlo. Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, I see that there are a number of different initiatives there, like the biomass and these other types of solutions that you're bringing to market. Again, which ones of these are there any of these that are already generating revenue? And yes. Again, how are you going about distributing the solutions?
Yeah, so we tend to have experience in enterprise SaaS. So these are mostly SaaS solutions. They all have their own particular go-to-market challenges. For instance, Biomass One, you have to court both farmers, seed providers, farmers, seed providers, laboratories, and energy plants. So that go-to-market is mostly a marketing effort. The actual SaaS part is pretty easy. We have 4 companies that are currently revenue positive. One of which is just about to be profitable. Pretty excited about that. Like I said, our effort really is making sure that the product is production ready and trying to help them secure revenue and secure investment. So I can go into detail, but there's so many to go into. I'm not sure which one's most interesting to you.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Yes, maybe we start with Sarah and then Joseph.
Data is obviously a key part of any artificial intelligence strategy. So I'm curious to hear an example of what you're doing in terms of building sustainable data strategies, as you mentioned.
Yeah, so in several of the companies we try to use open source data. For instance, with Floodlight, we're using the Environmental Protection Agency data. We're also using a lot of political data that's released, and we're moving into the prison supply chain data to understand who is contributing to what political campaigns and their bent in terms of like the prison supply chain. So a lot of times it's government produced data is the current source. So in terms of how do you analyze that? Well, sometimes, some of those are harder than others. I think one of the more interesting ones was with Floodlight, where the EPA provides data around locations and sites and facilities that have created violations, but does not provide anything in terms of the corporate ownership. So we had to use a bit of crawling and trying to associate these facilities with their corporate owners, especially owners within the S&P 500. That starts with some basic natural language processing, but then there's a lot of other entity resolution that goes into that once you've identified a facility that you want to match up. In another one we didn't picture, we are working on cancer research and clinical trials. And that one was actually one of the more interesting ones because we had to develop a novel method of graph-based semi-supervised learning around graph entropy, which is a topic that's really hot at Baylor University, that allows you to take clusters of concepts, not just individual tokens or words, and create constellations that reinforce themselves. So as you say, things that co-occur, those co-occurrences have more information in them because they're co-occurring than just their presence or absence, which is a technique that's not often captured by many of the more popular methods out there right now.
Great, thank you.
Hi, Brian, how are you?
I'm well, thank you for asking.
Great, thank you for the presentation. Could you explain who are your ideal customers, or maybe some of your customers, one, and then two, specifically, what is your revenue generating model? Talk a little bit about that as well.
I'll tackle the second one first, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So in terms of revenue, we have three primary streams of revenue. Our first stream of revenue is when we do a joint venture. Typically what happens is the corporate partner will contribute the seed capital. We usually look for about 500 to $1 million. And they will put that basically into a bank account with conditions and operating agreements. And then my team will actually operate the company for the first 6 to 18 months, and we'll take the majority of that as a fee. And this is very common amongst the startup studio world. There's a whole network of startup studios. Some studios look for funding. They take a fund and directly. We don't. So we take basically a fee to build the company, and we also take, more importantly, we take equity ownership so that we have a long-term commitment to the company. So we're essentially investors in that sense. With the margin from those deals, we actually invest in our own companies. Biomass One is one that we developed ourselves, and we invested in ourselves with our own capital. And so that one, we'll be operating it directly, and we'll be taking revenue and dispersals as they begin to come in. Part of that strategy is based on going into very large scale markets. For instance, Biomass One has a $300 million pipeline set for next year. So we can only sort of take these risks if we know that the actual revenue generated by the companies we're developing are going to be very large. I think I answered your question. I'm sorry, but I'm happy to.
You did. Real quick, and I know we got to go.
Yeah.
What's your split in terms of customers? Or is it between, let's say, academia versus commercial?
So I would say we're about 50-50, and by academia, I'm going to reinterpret that to mean like things we've done ourselves, and have developed in-house. So it's about 50-50. We have 4 companies right now that are in-house generated and 4 that are joint ventures.